Two of the Buffalo Bills' newly signed free agents are suspended for 6 games for substance abuse. We have some Stefon Diggs rumors to discuss and a lot more free agency with Justin from the Wandering Buffalo. Let's go.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Pro Football Hall of Famer and former Buffalo Bill Andre Reed. You're listening to Nate and the Fellas on Circle the Wagons podcast. Nobody circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills. Go Bills.
Where else would you rather be than right here, right now?
Hey, hey, let's go Buffalo. Hey, hey, let's go Buffalo. The Bills make me wanna.
What is up, Bills Mafia? Welcome to another episode of Circling the Wagons, a Buffalo fan base podcast. I am your host, Nate. Guys, thank you so much for joining us, whether you're watching us live streaming through Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, X, whatever the hell you want to call it. You're listening to this post edit on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We thank you guys for listening. I I'm going to discuss free agency, the first week of free agency, with one of my favorite people to talk Buffalo Bills with. Just met organically through social media, and you see him there with the Billy Buffalo hat. By the way, if you're not streaming this, you're missing out because he has one of the coolest hats that's out there, probably the coolest hat out there. And this is Justin from the Wandering Buffalo. Justin, how's it going, man? Good to talk to you.
It's always good to talk to you. Pre-show, just chatting with you always gets me hype. Had this hat behind me. Figured if we're going live, might as well bust it out. Hasn't been worn in a while, but love this hat.
Oh, it moves. It moves. I love that it's waving to me, waving to the audience.
Yeah, not distracting at all.
So if you ever need to talk while I just keep rambling on, just like raise a hand, one of Billy Buffalo's paws. You're like, excuse me, can I freaking talk or whatever? So lots of things to discuss, obviously. But before I get into that, we released an episode earlier this last week about Bills free agency, the first few days of it. Now it's been almost a week into it. A few more signings, nothing crazy since then, but obviously with the suspensions, we'll get into that in a minute. But first, Justin, your overall thoughts on this free agency class. You obviously have a team that went to the AFC Championship game, so this isn't a team that's, bare of talent in a lot of different areas, but I think that you would be naive as a Bills fan to say this team has no needs, especially when looking at how they lost in the AFC Championship game, how close they were to losing against the Ravens, and how dominating the Eagles were over the Chiefs when the Bills have never played the Chiefs in any sort of dominating fashion. What were your thoughts on just in general on the Bills free agency and what Brandon Beane has done so far, either signing players, letting players walk, and trading players, et cetera, et cetera?
So thus far in free agency, what I've liked the most about this free agency, and obviously there's some things we'll get into that are kind of questionable, but what I like most about free agency thus far is moves that we made that weren't outside moves. And that's just kind of retaining our own talent. And, it's talked about in the NFL all the time. Like the good teams draft, develop, retain their own players. And you can look at who all the biggest spenders are in free agency every year. And it very rarely leads to success. So while simultaneously we're all sitting there on, day one of free agency, wanting a big move, my favorite part of free agency is that we're not those dudes. We're able to extend Bernard. I'm sure one's coming for Benford, maybe Cook, but the drafting and developing of our own dudes and being able to keep that going. But then the additions that Beane did make, Bosa was not on my radar. But the criticism I'm seeing is Beane didn't make a big enough swing at defensive end. And to me, it's kind of what else did you want him to do? It's an offseason where seemingly Myles Garrett was available until he wasn't. Maybe Max Crosby was available till he wasn't. Trey Hendrickson, to an extent, maybe still available, but then I get a report today that the Bengals are working on a deal with him. So when you look at who is actually available at defensive end, I think Joey Bosa's kind of a home run, but with some, obvious risk to it. There's the health concerns built in, but I think this Joey Bosa contract was kind of Brandon Beane learning a hard lesson from Von Miller, and who knows, maybe this was more what Bosa wanted or more what the Bills wanted. But really, you took like a huge swing here with very little risk, right? Like 1 year, what is it, $12 million that can go up to 15, something like that. I mean, yes, he's older, but when healthy, he has the ability to be like that absolute game wrecking force. And if he deals with a bunch of injuries and, doesn't make much of an impact, then you reset the deck next year. Hopefully you drafted a couple younger guys and they're ready to come in. So to me, it's not, I think we all have the trauma from the Von Miller deal, as we're still kind of dealing with it. Dead cap hit this year of $17 million, but it's done so much differently. Like he can be every bit as an impact as Von Miller was coming in. And there's really not much for strings attached to it. Your dream here is he comes in, he balls out, and some team gives him 3-4 years, $100 million or something. And that's how he ends his career. We say, thanks for coming in. Maybe it plays into comp picks. I don't know, but I think there's just so much potential for that to be an awesome move. And it's really easy to get locked in on he's dealt with a lot of injuries. How many games is he even going to play?
Yeah, a guy like that doesn't come available, though, if he doesn't have those injuries. Because if he doesn't, he's putting up double-digit sack seasons each of the last 3 seasons, and he's probably getting another Myles Garrett or Max Crosby extension until he's ready to retire. Like, that's unfortunately the way it is. I agree with you. I like the Joey Bosa pick a lot for all the reasons you mentioned, especially because, like you said, it's low risk, low reward. It's kind of one of those things where, that I think if everything goes well, I think it's a home run. And I think that the only reason it's not a home run is because there's an injury. But then again, we're dealing with, we had the Von Miller trauma, like you mentioned. He was fine until he was injured. All players are fine until they're injured. I mean, that's not new. That's to every player. That's to Josh Allen. We're like, oh, we love the Josh Allen extension. Oh, he gets injured the first game. Well, we don't love it as much. Well, that's every player. I mean, the good thing I can say is that looking through his injury list, and Banged Up Bills did a really good job of going through it in depth, is there was a concussion history, but he hasn't had one since 2021. I believe he had three listed before 2021, but he hasn't had one since then. On all of the injuries seem to be less, I guess what you would say, like soft tissue based, right? Like hamstring injuries, like things that just keep cropping up over and over again. He had an ankle injury. There just didn't seem to be those ones that it's just like, man, it's almost like Matt Milano. For the most part, Matt Milano has just had freak injuries, really, right? Like he's injury prone, but it's not like, man, he cannot just get over like that hip flexor or whatever, just something. It was just random. Like he tore a bicep, stuff like that. He tore I can't forget what it was before that, his Achilles or whatever, like that's, or his, I don't know. But yeah, there's nothing to go along with it. I mean, what was so that sounds like your most favorite move. What was one of your least favorite moves?
I mean, the least favorite might be firing a little premature here, but it's got to be the Ogunjobi one right now. Just because, like, I don't know, the whole situation's shaking out weird. It sounds like from what I've seen that the Bills kind of find out around the same time Ogunjobi did, and he hadn't officially signed a contract yet, and he's facing a 6-game suspension. So, like, the Bills could have just rescinded the offer, but he, like, came to them on his own volition to let them know, and they liked that, so they signed him anyways. I think there's kind of a plus and minus to that situation of like, sure, we're likely going to add some rookies in the draft, and it'll get them forced playing time, and maybe he's not as necessary, and you're just kind of adding an extra piece for the stretch run. You don't know what's going to happen with health, all that, but like, I think that kind of goes into like a taking things for granted mentality of like, we were in the AFC Championship game last year. Our roster hasn't changed that much. It's a guy that we were adding to the roster. Like, Daquan Jones is still there. You're hoping Dwayne Carter takes a step. And like, these are things that I can put out there as like silver linings that make me feel better about it. But it's also like, okay, so if that wasn't good enough last year, now we're just assuming that we can get by during the 6-game suspension without somebody that was, he's signing a pretty sizable contract. You were intending for him to start. And now the plan has to be Daquan Jones, who a lot of people didn't think was good enough last year, back to starting, and Dwayne Carter having a role. And to me, it was kind of like, I appreciate the sentiment from Bean of like, this guy was forthright with us. He's doing the right things. Our Buffalo character guys. I like all that. I also, wanted to see several additions to this defensive tackle room. So like having to wait till week 7 to see how it's playing out, I don't feel great about that.
No, I think so let's get into the suspensions just because, you brought it up so well in that transition and segue right there is, the Michael Hoecht suspension is one thing. He's going to be here with us for 3 years. Not a fan of that. Obviously, that he's not going to be there for 6 games, but he'll be here in the long haul. They'll get used to it. The Ogunjobi thing, like you mentioned, is the one that frustrates me the most because, and I'm not saying like this is Brandon Beane's fault. Like, I mean, based on what the Athletic said, was that Bean said the team found out about Ogunjobi's suspension after he and the team agreed to terms. So it's like, what are you mad at Brandon Beane for? It's just there's no reason, but it's still a bad because you have a guy in a 1-year deal. He's missing the first 6 games. And people say, oh, you don't need to gel with the defensive line, or you don't need to, it's just, go left, right, straight. Like, it's not that big of a deal. It's like, well, it kind of is actually, because we've brought several defensive tackles in the last few years that have never gelled and never quite acclimated to the scheme and just never panned out. I'm talking Tim Settle Jr., talking Poona Ford, Quentin Jefferson twice. I mean, I could go on for defensive tackles. And it wasn't until, Daquan Jones got here that we actually had a free agent defensive tackle look pretty halfway decent, right? So the thing is, I wasn't a huge fan of that signing. I know we wanted to give competition to Dwayne Carter and Ed Oliver, but the guy's not really a 1 technique. He's more of a 3 technique. I think we need more of a 1 technique to compete with Daquan Jones, because Daquan Jones is he's tailing off. Like, he's not on the rise in his career. I mean, he's the best 1 tech defensive tackle we've had in a long time. But he's, 33 now? I mean, he's just not, he's in the twilight of his career. He's not at the upstart of his career. I wanted them to get a guy like that would compete with Daquan Jones. So I wasn't a huge fan of the signing to begin with, and then add in the suspension. I mean, it's just, I know it's a fresh body. I know that there's going to be room for him to gel towards the end of the season, but I'd rather him be ready. I'd rather him get through that tough patch, like through halfway through the season. I mean, some of these guys, like you're thinking in other positions, Curtis Samuel, they just never gel and they never find their way, or they're injured. And, there's no saying that he could come back in week 7 and not get injured in the first game. Like, that's just, I don't know. It seems like we're trying to justify it, which I get. It's not Brandon Beane's fault, but at the same time, and they were kind of in a tough spot because when you say that you're going to sign a guy, then you let all the other like defensive tackle options go. Right? Like, you're not trying to make deals with the other defensive tackle options. So it was too late for them to say, well, okay, well, what's plan B? Well, that guy's already been signed. That guy's already been signed. That guy's already been signed, like now all of a sudden you're going in your 5th or 6th or 10th option then. So I wasn't a huge fan of that. I just saw John Roberts said Daquan is 34 in December. Thank you, John. Scott, our buddy Scott from Buff Fandemonium said one tech defensive tackles are plenty in this year's draft. Thank God, because we will definitely need that. I don't know how you feel. Just in general, I'm like, Ed Oliver, I thought he didn't have a completely underwhelming season last year, but he didn't play nearly as well as he did in 2023. I think some of that had to do with Daquan Jones, and whatever the reason is, it feels like he needs Ed Oliver, for him to do well, is he needs someone really good to play next to him, to bring out the best in Ed Oliver. So the reason why I wanted another 1 tech defensive tackle was because I want the defensive tackle group to do the best they can to optimize that group. You need to bring in someone better to play along Ed Oliver, to bring them both up. Have you ever seen it that way, or put those two together with Ed Oliver needing a little bit of an assist when it comes to his play?
Yeah, I think that goes all the way back to when the Bills had Star, and like we had stretches where Star was like available, healthy, and playing halfway decent football, and Ed Oliver was playing with his hair on fire, and it was really the same with Daquan Jones, you know, going back 2 seasons now, and I think without like another stud next to him, like Ed Oliver's good. He's an above average defensive tackle. He's going to make your plays, yada, yada, yada. But I think some of the things that exist with Ed Oliver, of him being a little bit undersized and, being on the interior, like the focus for the offensive line. And I don't think he's a guy designed to beat double teams and be the focal point for the offense. And I think that one tech position, like it doesn't even have to be the best guy in the league there. It has to be somebody that can eat up blocks and just let Oliver and the linebackers play a little bit more free. I do think that we'll see what happens with the draft, and maybe I'll be completely wrong. I think that we as fans might be a little bit more into like a one tech position than the Bills are, and we'll see. Like I said, there's a lot of them in the draft, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but it seems to me like they really like prioritizing like that 3-tech type defensive tackle, and we'll have to kind of see what happens there.
Yeah, I like what AJ Tharp said here. Ed Oliver is Sam Adams, and we don't have a Pat Williams. It's funny. I feel like Sam Adams was like the one tech we'd never had. We haven't had since Sam Adams, and Pat Williams was like Pat Williams was so big he could probably play one tech also. But I think he was. I can't remember. I don't remember if they even ran a 3-4 then. But those were our best defensive tackles probably in my lifetime. Those two guys right there. But yeah, it's for whatever reason, like they've never prioritized that position, and it shows because all the free agents they bring in, they've never. I'm trying to think. Bean has never drafted a one-tech defensive tackle. I don't think he ever has because he's only drafted 2 defensive tackles in general with Ed Oliver and Dwayne Carter, but he's never drafted a one-tech, which is crazy to me. So they either don't believe the position is that big of a deal or what. But I mean, from the outside in, it seems like it's clearly a big deal. So it's funny. Mookie's it. He says, so far bad groceries. Yeah. Thank you, Mookie. I agree. Yeah. The Michael Hoecht thing, by the way, we were joking around before we started recording. Michael Hoecht, if that is the way to pronounce his name, there is no reason to ever think that it should be pronounced that name unless you heard him say it himself, because there is.
I feel like if that was my last name in life and every single person that I had ever met has to be pronouncing that wrong, I would modify how I'm pronouncing it. That there's nothing in that name that tells me that that's how I'm supposed to pronounce it. That's what he told me to do, so I will do that. But there's a CH in there. We get a Y sound. I don't understand it. But Michael Hoecht.
Yeah, Michael Hoecht. There's no Y, there's no I, and then the E, the C, the H are all silent. You guys got more silent letters than any other name. It's like your last name is like Jackson, and you're just John. Like, wait, what? What happened to the X? Anyway, yeah. So going into that, it is what it is, but I got to be honest, like it feels as a Bills fan, you're looking at these 2 guys getting suspended as soon as you sign them, and you're just like, what is going on, right? Like, why can't we have nice things as Bills fans? Because even the new shiny pieces, which again, like, I'm usually a much more optimistic person. Like, I love giving Sean McDermott the benefit of the doubt, Brandon Beane the benefit of the doubt, Josh Allen the benefit of the doubt. I feel like I try to justify more ways than not, but like, I'm okay on this free agency. I don't love it, but I don't hate it. Again, this is a team that went to the AFC Championship game. So how much are you truly going to improve? I think, like you said, Joey Bosa is a great signing if it works out. But all these other guys like Derek Forrest, Ogunjobi, like we just mentioned, Josh Palmer, like these are all guys that are kind of huge projections at this point. Like neither of them have proven to be reliable starters that you can just plug in and get instant success. Like there's a lot of reasons why these guys weren't re-signed by their teams. So, great if they can project into something much better than they have been, like Mac Hollins was. Mac Hollins had a career year with the Buffalo Bills. And then again, he had Josh Allen throwing to him. So maybe I hope the same for Josh Palmer, but there's just no proof for that it will happen. And that's fine, but that's the reason why I'm not hot on it. I'm not cold on it. I think it was okay. I think it was pretty good. Like, I don't love it, especially with the suspensions, but I try to be more optimistic. It's okay. I think that when they start adding draft picks, when they start, adding more pieces, again, people like to say, as you mentioned, rookies are going to be starting in for Ogunjobi and, getting some playing time. The Bills don't like starting rookies. The Bills try their best to avoid starting rookies if they can. So I'm not sure that thought process will actually play out the way you think it will. So, I mean, we'll see from there. But I think it was okay. I thought it was okay.
I think kind of all of those things that you just mentioned it's kind of like low-key why I like this offseason, because like we're talking about a Bills team that, like we said, was in the championship game last year. We pretty much are bringing back the same roster. So like what I like about this offseason thus far is I can see some of these players like fitting in, and I can make up in my mind what kind of role I think they're going to be. Like Josh Palmer, great example. I don't expect him to be a 160 target, 100 catch, 1,000-yard receiver with 10 touchdowns. It's just not. I don't think he's that guy. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think that we're going to see that. But we're also coming off of a season where we had this everybody eats philosophy. We had a bunch of guys that were, pretty much no-namers around the league. Khalil Shakir, we know how awesome he is in Buffalo, but it's not like he's a household name in the NFL. And you can say Amari Cooper, but the version of Amari Cooper that showed up to the Bills, like it's not doesn't line up with what the name recognition is, right? So to me, it's kind of Josh Palmer is kind of the Bills doubling down on the everybody eats of, we don't have a guy in our receiving core that straight up beats man coverage, is a great route runner, and that's how he wins. Like, okay, you got a guy that fills that role, and he's going to have production. It's probably not going to be 1,000-yard receiver, but it's filling a role. As far as like Michael Hoecht goes, that one's suspension hurts me a little bit less, and I don't know if this is kind of like me protecting myself, but like I'm mostly bummed out because now I have to wait to see how he's deployed. But I don't think he was brought in to like necessarily like upgrade or replace any of the positions that we saw from last year that needed work. And it's looking at like this chess piece type of player that he seems like he's going to be, depending on where you look, he's listed as a linebacker, defensive tackle, defensive end. And like my immediate thought goes to like that tail end of Lorenzo Alexander. And, not to put any disrespect on Lorenzo Alexander, because he was awesome in that role. I don't want to just lump somebody in there. But to me, that was like an extra layer to the defense of like, oh, teams think they got us figured out. You forgot we got Michael Hoecht here, and he's at defensive tackle, whatever, dropping into zone coverage. So that one doesn't like hurt me as much, but the rest of these players that got brought in, like I see a role for them. And Derek Forrest, he was balling out in Washington and kind of on the ascent, and it seems like he got cast aside because there was a regime change there and he dealt with an injury, and the ship kind of kept moving without him. But I'm actually low-key really excited for him. Like, I like what we have in Rapp and Bishop. I think the Bills like what they have in Rapp and Bishop, but Bishop was still young. He still had his struggles last year. You have a big investment in him, but I think he still has a lot to prove. And Rapp has 2 years left on his deal, pretty decent deal, but where does that end up? Maybe you got a guy waiting in the wings that's ready to ball out. Plus we deal with injuries all over the place. So improving depth that's cool with me.
I actually feel, oddly enough, more confident in the safety position this year than last year because, you know, they brought back DeMar Hamlin on 1-year deal, which is all well and good. You have depth, if nothing else. Again, hoping that Cole Bishop can start, like you said, take that next step. And then you have Derek Forrest, who's kind of like a wild card. Could he be a Mike Edwards and never see the field, or could he be a guy that pushes Rapp or Bishop for a starting role? And then to say that there's a possibility that maybe they draft someone as well. The safety position, oddly enough, like I feel pretty good. I feel like the baseline of where they'll be is last year, and now it can only go up. However, you know, we mentioned defensive line. We went into depth in there, pass rush, not a huge upgrade, but maybe potentially some upside there. I think is still a downgrade as of now. Missing Rasul Douglas, going to Dane Jackson. I don't think they intend necessarily on Dane Jackson being the starter, but he's a hell of a better third cornerback than Kaiir Elam, right? Like that's the way it is. And as of right now, I see the biggest need on this roster is cornerback to line up opposite of Christian Benford, because that seems to be the biggest hole, in my opinion, on this team. And because I was always of the opinion, if you're not going to upgrade the front end and get like a Myles Garrett to really just, you know, destroy this pass rush, you're not destroy the pass rush, destroy the offensive line with your pass rush. He just leveled his pass rush. It's just awful.
Ruined
now.
everything.
But then you need to help the back end. And I think the back end is getting better, but without Rasul Douglas, I mean, that's a big hole. He might not have been as good in 2023 as he was in the second half of 2022 when he got traded, but he's a lot better than Dane Jackson ever was, in my opinion, at cornerback. So as of right now, like, so let's say the draft starts today. No more free agents signed. The Bills' first round pick comes around. Everything being equal position wise, what position do you take with your first round pick? Is it the cornerback, like I just mentioned? Is it another position? Where do you go?
So this question feels like it should be very straightforward for me because like you said, I think cornerback is not only like the biggest need right now, but it's like an obvious, screaming, glaring biggest need on the roster. And like I'm cool with Dane Jackson coming in to like help establish a floor of like knowing what you're getting. But like you mentioned, Rasul Douglas, like I got to see what he signs for somewhere that like you couldn't bring him back. There's still some guys floating out there. Like I would have felt better about Stefon Gilmore, you know, on a 1-year deal. And really going into the offseason, I wanted to see like 2-3 names through free agency added, and like one of them being a bigger name, and maybe you bring in like a Dane Jackson to compete for CB3 depth role, whatever. But we're talking about he's slotted in to be the starter right now. It feels like, you know, the year we went into the draft and took Kaiir Elam, like it was so obvious that that's the position that we needed to go. But I also do have a lot of faith in McDermott and Babbage developing dudes. When you look at, you know, Dane Jackson, the guy that we're talking about, Levi Wallace, Christian Benford being a 5th round pick, like they've gotten production out of later round picks. And honestly, I know everything's not linear and equal, whatever, but we've had much more success drafting our cornerbacks in the later rounds than, you know, going in the early rounds. The 2 early picks that he made being Trey White, who was obviously awesome, and then Kaiir Elam, but like they found production. And I don't know, it's tough for me because it depends who ends up there. It's we have the ammo to be able to trade up and get a guy that we want. I would say that with the moves that they've made this offseason, my pick would have to go to cornerback. Just I just can't really fathom a world where week 1 our starting cornerback is or our starting CB2 is Dane Jackson. But like as I mentioned, like I wanted to see 2-3 guys added into this mix and to compete with Kaiir Elam and see how things shake out. Well, now not only did we only sign one in Dane Jackson, but Kaiir Elam's been shipped out of town, and Christian Benford is awesome, but he's dealt with some injuries of his own. So, you know, we're one snap away from Dane Jackson and Jamarcus Ingram being your starting 2. And there's just a lot of work that still needs to be done there, in my opinion. So I'd have to go there.
The Bills have had such terrible injury luck in the
It's the
postseason.
worst.
It's just like, here's a question, just hypothetical. Christian Benford doesn't go out in the first quarter in the AFC Championship game. Do the Bills win that one?
I don't know if they win that one. I certainly think personally, I feel like they could have. But what I will say is I was sitting on the couch watching that game with my wife, and Christian Benford went out in like the first quarter, and I was distraught. And she like watches the games with me. She doesn't follow it to the same level, but she was like, "Who is it?" And I was like, "Christian Benford." And she says, "Is he good?" And I was like, "That's probably the worst non-Josh Allen injury that we could have dealt with in this game." And like from the first quarter, like maybe that's why I wasn't so crushed by this loss, because like I was in the first quarter and Benford went out, and obviously he had the concussion the week before. It looked like another pretty bad concussion, and I was in the first quarter thinking like we're probably cooked, and somehow that ended up being a close game with Kyrie Elam falling down on routes and running 13 yards behind receivers. And to answer your question simply, I think if he's in that game, there's a very high chance that we're able to win that game.
I like how you said that he's one of the most important defenders out there, because, I mean, if you think about it, I couldn't name more than 2 or 3 that I'd even put on his level between Terrell Bernard, Matt Milano when he's healthy, and then Taron Johnson. And otherwise, like, I mean, maybe Greg Rousseau is up there, but not quite, because, I mean, you could lose anyone on the defensive line, and you're like, well, what did they even do that game that was that, like, wow, like they were great against the run, or wow, they were, they just got to Mahomes. I know Mahomes got the ball out really quickly, so they didn't get a chance necessarily, but I wasn't really worried that they were going to make a huge impact anyway. So,
yeah, for me, it kind of goes into like where my concern is right now, and like why I would have to say cornerback is, like you said earlier in the show, like we can't predict injuries. They happen whenever, whatever. But our secondary, it's really our back seven has dealt with a ton of injuries over the past few seasons. When you're thinking about AJ Klein coming off the couch, you're thinking about Benford going out, and it's just the depth at the cornerback position right now is just terrifying to me. And maybe this is something that we don't get to be privy to because we're not in the building, but like Daquan Hardy's on the practice squad, and he was drafted to be like this special teams guy, whatever. And I thought in the preseason he looked better playing cornerback than he did in any special teams role. And, it's preseason, it is what it is, but I didn't get to see him after that. So like maybe Jamarcus Ingram is the next, like we're going to take a bet on this guy. Nobody's going to see it coming. And then we all fall in love with him. But even at that, like we're so thin at the position with like just warm bodies that like it has to be something where more investments are being made.
There's just so many different ways the Bills could go with that first pick, or just the draft in general. I usually like to talk about positions where the Bills should double dip. Like last year, I thought the Bills should have double dipped to wide receiver. It would have been nice to get another guy to go along with Keon Coleman, maybe a guy, like you mentioned, in Josh Palmer that does have separation. The Bills didn't really have that last year. Or a guy like this year, I think they need to draft a burner somehow, some guy with speed. And I think that, I was talking with my co-host, John. It's funny, at my daughter's birthday, like his daughters came too. So like we talked Bills, obviously. And he's just like, you think about it, the Bills are really missing speed on both sides of the ball. Like really fast, like wide receivers, really fast defensive backs. Like they don't have that in the safety position, the corner position. Like, and I'm like, you're not wrong. Like they don't. So I would like, if there was a position that they would double dip this year, I think it would be corner. For all the reasons you just mentioned, the fact that we're woefully thin, and then, our starters are really sus at this point. So, yeah.
I had a conversation along those lines with a buddy of mine about the safety position, and like if Malachi Starks were to fall to the Bills, like would you take him at 30? And like I don't see it from this regime just based on history, trends, like what they've always done. They rely on a lot of scheme. They don't You don't have to be like a supreme athlete to operate in this scheme. But like part of me always wants to see like what like bona fide blue chip safety would look like within this defense. When you think about how awesome Poyer and Hyde were together, and like neither of them were tremendous athletes. These weren't dudes that were like highly sought after first round picks, and they were amazing. But like, what could it look like if you had like an absolute stud back there in this defense? And I just don't think it's ever going to be a position that they want to invest in that way. And I feel kind of similar to the cornerback position, and like with kind of the caveat of we're talking about what they're going to do with their first round pick, right? And very obviously the Bills have done it time and time again. Like, you don't have to find all your talent in the first round. You can get dudes in the second round that can come in and ball. But like, I want to see somebody added in like the first round and the third round, not like a third and a fifth. I want, and I know we're like at the same time we're having this conversation, like they found Benford in the fifth. I want more dart throws at like closer to can't miss prospects. And I really want to lock down that cornerback position for like the next 5 years.
Yeah, I think Taron Johnson was a fifth too, and he's our best corner, right? Like, or one of our he was a later or fourth pick or something, fourth round. He was
fourth round.
Yeah. So here's something interesting. We're talking about athleticism. One player on the back end that does have elite athleticism that we've talked about briefly is Cole Bishop. Cole Bishop has an RAS score of 9.82, which is tremendous for safety. 6'2", 206 pounds. His 40-yard dash had a 9.22 out of 10 for a 4.45. So like, I remember, this is jogging my memory. One of the reasons I was so high on that pick is like, wow, like look at what Bean and McDermott have done with Poyer and Hyde, guys that weren't elite athletes. And they got the most out of guys, because if they were, they would have never left Green Bay and Cleveland or whatever. They would have easily gotten re-signed. But they saw something in them. They coached them up. Great players. I was like, imagine what they can do with Cole Bishop. Imagine what you can do with that type of athleticism they never had before. And they currently didn't have. Taylor Rapp's not that guy, right? DeMar Hamlin's not. And then just like put the coaching into him. And so that might be the season. He might become an all-pro this season, or he might not see the field as a starter. Like, there's so many different ways it could go, but I do like that about him. I did like what I saw from what I saw of him. I know he got burned on that huge play in Houston, but from reading Joe Biscali's articles, he's like, he looked a lot better after that, which is what you want to see from those rookies, getting burnt early and bouncing back instead of, falling down and then falling down and then falling down again. So, not to name any names. Hey, it happens.
Right. I guess I kind of forgot what a great athlete Cole Bishop is. And I guess maybe we do see like that really big jump from him in year 2, and, kind of banking on that. So, I guess we hope for that, and we'll get our wish of seeing what a dynamic athlete looks like back there. I think his rookie year was, I don't want to say disappointing, because I do think he got better throughout the season, but I'm going to chalk it up to I had too high of expectations for him as a rookie in year 1. And, it's coming off of replacing Poyer and Hyde. And, it's easy to forget in the moment real quick that we were really blessed with whatever top 5, top 3, whatever you want to rank it, safety tandem in the league for like 7-8 years straight. So I'm going to chalk that one up to a little bit of unfair expectations for me, and hope and pray for an outstanding year 2 out of him.
Yeah, I don't think you were wrong at all to think that, because I think a lot of us thought that, here you have this second round pick, a guy that we just mentioned athletically is super gifted. Why would you think that he wouldn't be able to beat out DeMar Hamlin? I mean, this was a guy that played the run well at Utah. He was really good in the short to intermediate coverage area. That Dalton Kincaid was saying that he got the best of him in Utah. And at the time, at least, we thought Dalton Kincaid was a really good tight end that, the rest of the league need to be put on notice for. But again, going back to the things we mentioned earlier, this regime, this staff does not love starting safeties if they don't have to. It's almost like they do it because they don't have a choice because of injury. But if they see an out where they don't have to start a rookie, a lot of the times they don't. They don't. I mean, again, Dwayne Carter, there were times where he flashed. He might have been better than Ed Oliver at times, but they were not going to start him over Ed Oliver in any way, shape, or form. They might give him reps. They might, here or there if there's an injury. But again, this like Keon Coleman, again, like he was there. He was a lot of snaps, but he was not a major part of the offense due to injuries and a lot of other things. But that's just not the thing. So anyway, getting back on topic, let's start talking about the Stefon Diggs rumors going about. So I was great before we started recording. You messaged me and you're like, we got to talk about Stefon Diggs. And then I'm like, I got to find out what's going on with Stefon Diggs because I don't even know what to talk about. So do you want to lead this in, or you want me to tell you the little I've found out about it?
Yeah, I'll lead in. It's kind of funny. I give my old boy there because, like, how much did we talk about Stefon Diggs stuff when he was here? That was just like, I don't know about you, but there was a lot of nonsense that like I felt obligated to talk about because, I do a Bills podcast and it's a huge name for the Bills, but I don't want to talk about what's getting posted on social media, all that crap. But yeah, basically I had seen today that he had gone through, I don't know how anything on technology or social medias works.
Yeah.
He unarchived, re-archived. He brought back all his Buffalo Bills photos and like related posts to his Instagram, and apparently he did it with the Vikings too. So it's probably a big old nothing burger. But you know how these things take shape real quick. Somebody saw he had his Bills photos posted back up, and then the conversation leads to he's still sitting out there in free agency. We're past the part of free agency where the big moves are being made and he's floating out there. So the question automatically becomes, would you take him back in Buffalo? And I'll let you go first on that.
Oh man, the thought had not crossed my mind until you texted me because I know he's available. He's coming off an ACL injury from October, the end of October. And we all know that it takes usually at least one full season to recover from that. So there's a few different things going into this, but that's my first concern is the injury. I don't think that's worth, I mean, even if you paid him, maybe if you paid him the vet minimum just to have a guy. But the problem is if Josh Allen still wanted Stefon Diggs on this roster, he would still be on this roster. So after looking at what Josh has done this last season without him winning MVP, why would you invite even the potential for whatever drama, whatever, issues they were having either externally or internally? Why would you even give that a chance to spring back up? It's because, if we as fans see that there's a huge need for a top level wide receiver. So I think that's why we're interested. Plus, he has familiarity. Plus, we're nostalgic. This country, America, people in general, we love nostalgia, right? We look back at the SI Kids edition, and you see him, cheesing with Josh Allen on the cover, and you're just like, how can these guys not be best friends? And have a true to life bromance. But as we all saw, like nothing lasts forever, right? People break up, people stop being friends, etc. So I don't want him back, even on a vet minimum deal. I think it's almost subtraction by addition by bringing him. It's not like it's been 5 years ago where it's like, okay, they've had enough time to separate and, things have changed or whatever. Like this is a time for reunion. Like, I don't think that about Sty. I think that him bringing up the pictures on Instagram is another form of he's not maturing in the fact that like he does that stuff. I don't know if it's social media team or what, but he would do that like that whole "you sure" thing on Twitter when somebody's like, Josh doesn't need a top level wide receiver. He's like, you sure? He didn't have to comment on that, but that's his, that's his deal. That's what he does, right? Like that's how he plays it. And to me, it's kind of childish. And at first, I could let it pass while he was here because he was such a good wide receiver. He was the best wide receiver the Bills had since Eric Moulds, in my opinion. And like I loved him. And so I was willing to look past the, him causing all this drama on social media. And then when asked point blank about him skipping, OTAs and him being asked about a point blank and him just smirking, like, what do you mean? Like, oh, I don't know about that. Like, okay, Stefon, like, you're just so innocent, right? Like, this guy, I miss his production, but I don't think it's worth bringing him back, even for a vet minimum deal. I don't have any interest in that. And I doubt Josh Allen does, but those are my thoughts. What about you?
So I'll start out saying that I agree with you. I think that there's like it's like breaking up with a toxic ex, and like you're doing well, everything's going great in your life, and then like you got a text from them, like, are you going to respond to it? And like the answer should always be no. I will play for content's sake a little bit of devil's advocate on like situations where I could kind of see it. But like for me, the ultimate no here kind of leads to like he is an all-around receiver. He was a great wide receiver one for a reason. But I think with that everybody eats mentality and the skill sets that they've filled out on this roster, I think it sounds crazy to say like Stefon Diggs being redundant, but like you brought in, honestly, Joshua Palmer reminds me of like Diggs a ton. The same type of skill set. The Diggs was kind of like just breaking out in Minnesota when we traded for him. He wasn't like this bona fide number one. And don't get it twisted, I'm not saying their production was the same, but like what they do great is like the route running, the separation. He's like the same size as Diggs, 20 pounds heavier. So I feel like you kind of already filled that similar role. And what I think this team needs on offense, same as what you said, is that deep threat, the true burner, the guy that can stretch you horizontally and vertically, use that to open up things for other people. So I think there's a number of reasons that are like the personality, the off the field stuff, all that stuff that we've already dealt with, I think are like easy things to cite as a reason for no. But like, where does he fit into this offense is more of a practical reason for me. But like I said, kind of devil's advocate of looking at the room with Matt Collins leaving town. I mean, you're talking your top receivers here: Palmer, Coleman, Shakir, Curtis Samuel, who started coming on a little bit towards the tail end of last season. But I mean, you're not really going 4 receivers deep right now. And then you look into, maybe somebody on the practice squad is going to come up. You got Shavers had the one play. That was awesome. Jalen Virgil had some time. The Bills added Laviska Shenault. KJ Hamler's been floating around. There's just like not much there that is like super promising for 4 receivers, let alone like the 5th receiver that they're usually going to carry. My holdup on that would be, well, who's filling the special teams role? Because Stefon Diggs isn't coming in at 31, 32, whatever he is now, to do special teams. But I could look at this from the perspective of, Josh Allen being like an ultimate competitor. And like you said, the Sports Illustrated cover, the Step Brothers thing going on. And these two dudes were like legitimately best friends until they weren't. And I have friends in my life. I'm sure you have friends in your life that we've got into it. We crashed out pretty hard, and you come back around at a certain point when enough time has passed. And I could at least see a situation where, Brandon Beane, Dermott, Josh all get together in a room, and Beane's like, hey guys, I just want to throw it out there. He could provide a role to make the team better. How's everybody feeling? And like, it could be, like you said, it could be an automatic no from Josh, and his say is going to matter in that department. Where he could be like, I think that guy could do something to help us win a championship. Let's kick the tires. And while I'm not wishing for this to happen, while I don't think it will happen, I think there is something lost in the conversation, is like the immediate reaction to Stefon Diggs is you're thinking like this big time $20-30 million a year guy. And he's not that dude right now. He's been sitting on free agency for 2 weeks, coming off an injury as an aging receiver. I think if you're bringing him into the building, you're talking like 1 year, few $1,000,000, maybe the vet minimum with a bunch of incentives of like, hey, if we can get you on the field for 50% of snaps, we'll give you a kicker. So I think this could be a situation where like you add him and you make him come compete, and maybe his time sitting in free agency and hurt last year. I mean, the last time he was playing football, he was him. He was telling you that he was him, and he was untouchable. He was on top of the world. And now he's eating a big old fat slice of humble pie. And maybe for him, that's a big personality shift. He can make it work, whatever. Maybe he's just not interested in the humble pie and still thinks that, he's on the top of the world. But I could see a world where you bring him in on a very low deal like that, and he competes throughout training camp, and he's not making an impact, and you just cut him again. And it's one of these camp bodies with upside, and if it doesn't work, you cut him, and it doesn't cost you anything. So I could see a world where it happens. Want to reiterate this. I'm not signing up for it.
Man, just when I thought I had my feet set in,
I changed your mind.
You didn't change my mind. You had me open to a potential possibility. When you start going down the wide receiver depth chart, and I knew what it was, but I just really haven't completely looked at it from that standpoint as, if you had a healthy Stefon Diggs, talent wise, where would he fit on that depth chart? There's a lot worse wide receiver fours out there than a Stefon Diggs when he's healthy. That's for damn sure. I mean, he just when he's healthy, he's good. I mean, he's aging, but even an aging Stefon Diggs might be better than a Keon Coleman in his second year, potentially. I know that's a completely different position that they play, but you mentioned the redundancy between Palmer and Diggs. I totally get that. But I mean, what if Palmer went down? Like, is there a worse player out there, to give reps to if Palmer went down and step in that wide receiver 4 or 5 role and play in his absence? Yeah, there's a lot worse out there. So Stefon Diggs, I could see that. So I'm not totally against it. I feel like 1 year is too early for some humble pie. So I love what you said about the Toxic X, because one of my favorite movies is Swingers. Have you ever seen Swingers before? Swingers is a classic.
Homework.
Swingers is a classic movie. It's about Jon Favreau and Vince Vaughn before they were huge and big and movie stars and directors and all that stuff. I think it was an indie movie made by Jon Favreau, but he's the main character. So essentially the story is, the beginning of the movie literally starts with him talking to the guy from Office Space, Peter. His name is Peter in Office Space. I can't think of his name in real life right now, but he's talking to him and he's like, dude, so what do I do? He's like, well, she broke up with you. So, he's like, well, should I call her? He's like, no, you don't call her. He's like, well, what if I want to call her? He's like, you don't call her. It's just like, well, what if I want her to call me? He's like, she's not going to call you. He's like, but what if I really want her to? He's like, well, she's not going to call you until you're over her. He's
Right.
like, but what if I want to be over her? He's like, no. He's like, not until you're completely over her. He's like, and there's the rub. And that's like the point of the whole movie, because, he's trying to get over her. He's trying all these things. He's doing all these new things. They're going to Vegas. They're doing this and that. And it's true, man. Like there's a toxic, here you have Josh Allen. He's the Jon Favreau character, right? He's literally, he's starting with a brand new wide receiving core. He's trying his best. He just, fell low on expectations in another postseason this year or the past year. And he's starting over again. Nobody has any expectations. Nobody thinks he's going to succeed. And then he succeeds. He gets engaged to a Hollywood starlet. He gets a $300 million extension. He wins MVP. He gets to the AFC Championship game, this and that. And then it's just like, oh, hey, by the way, Stefon Diggs is calling now, finally. I know that it wasn't, he didn't get broken up with by Stefon Diggs, but it's just kind of a funny, like, yeah, it's funny. It's easy to come around when your ex is on top of the world, right? And you broke up with them. But yeah, I like the analogy.
Yeah, I'll say this. It's a position where I think they still need to add in the draft, because there's not much out there free agency wise. But let me give you this hypothetical of just two dudes sitting out there. They got history with the Bills, and you got Diggs out there. You got Amari Cooper. You can get them both on the same contract. You're going Cooper or you're going Diggs?
Man,
Because the free agent pickings are slim right now.
why? Here's a question. Maybe you know this better than me. Why didn't Amari Cooper succeed more with the Buffalo Bills? Because, I mean, he only caught 20 balls while he was here, and he was traded, what, in week 8? So that was like at least 9, 10, 11 games, that he had with the Bills, and the chemistry just didn't really exist. I believe the offense played better when he got here as a whole, and that might have just been his presence, or it might have been a scheme change, or both. But I'm just curious why he didn't succeed better with the Bills, and I'm kind of wondering if they came back. If he came back, would it be any better? Was he dealing with more injuries than we really truly knew about? Because I knew he was dealing with some injuries when he first got here. Didn't he pull his hamstring in the practice or something when he first got here? Something like that.
He also had a wrist injury that I believe he elected to not have surgery on, and he was playing with that soft cast. So I'm sure that was part of it. I do know that going through last season, I was super hyped when we traded for him. And like you said, the offense got better and all of the factors of like, you have to account for him, blah, blah, blah. But like the majority of the time he was on the team last season, I was kind of hoping for like a 1-year deal, run it back, have an off season with Josh Allen. And it just didn't materialize. And I kind of assumed it would be, he's looking for $15-20 million for, a 2-3 year deal to kind of round out his career. But now as we're getting further and further into the off season, the contracts are getting smaller and, holes are being filled. And now we're getting into the draft. Like that dude might still be out there for a 1 year, whatever, $7-8 million contract. So, I mean, it's very similar situations to me. And for me, as much as it's so hard not to say Diggs because like on the same time, like on this, it's the two heads of the same coin type deal, whatever. Like every time I hear his name, I start thinking about, that last season drama and, how unproductive he was down the stretch, and Khalil Shakir being more productive on like half the targets. But then for me, I think about like all the good times. And when I'm looking at this depth chart of like, okay, if I slot him in at wide receiver 4, now it's making me think about like Gabe Davis when he was a wide receiver 4 and how good he was before we asked him to be a 2. Like, yes, Diggs is aging and coming off an injury, but like as a wide receiver 4, I'd probably still give the contract to Cooper.
To Cooper, yeah. I think if it wasn't for the drama and the injury, I might put Diggs a little bit higher. But yeah, Cooper for now, give him an off season, let him deal with or get surgery for that wrist or whatever, get the chemistry in training camp. I would absolutely bring him back for like a 1 year, 5 or 6, if he's willing to take that. I'm not sure he is, because his success was a lot more recent. I believe he's maybe a year younger than Diggs. But again, the injury, I mean, not coming off an ACL is huge. But I would absolutely take Amari Cooper back for the right price. Definitely, just to have that, because you can draft someone, like you said, a burner, and they could still find a role for him, whether it's special teams also or punt return, kick returns, or something. Like they can find a way to get that person on the roster. But Amari Cooper's not that guy. Unfortunately, that is the one of the few things I think we're missing on this roster. But I think they draft one at some point. Luckily, you can get speed guys that don't have huge college numbers later in the draft. So day 2, day 3, whatnot. But man, this has been a lot of fun. Just, I mean, it's funny is, we've been talking for almost 2 hours now, because we talked for like a half hour before. Luckily, you let your wife know that this was going to last, quite a while. But
I told her not to wait up tonight.
Nice. I have a question for you though. So for those of you that don't know, Justin is a chef. He's a great cook. We've talked offline about different, things that he likes to make or whatever. Is there a game day recipe for any certain type of food, or any certain dish or entree or appetizer, or anything that you love on game day, or several of them, or anything that really gets you in the mood for football prime time or Sunday or whatever?
So I wouldn't say like any particular recipes. I don't like, I am a very routine based guy, but like with food, I don't like eating the same thing like week after week. So like I have a killer chicken wing dip, but I can't make that every week. But I do as often as I can. Schedules have been absolutely bonkers, particularly this past season. But I do always try to make like a nice meal, whether it's, like a crazy bonkers salad or a ribeye or, some breakfast bagels, just to kind of that late lunch, early dinner, get me through that nice window so I'm not cooking anything during the game. I would say my favorite one I did last year was it was for I think it was a 4:00 game, and I'd gotten a Blackstone grill for Christmas, and I did ribeye and asparagus on the grill. I made my homemade mashed potatoes, and it was one of those hug meals that keep you full all through the night.
So you and I have talked. That sounds amazing, by the way. I got a Blackstone a couple of years ago. My wife got it for Father's Day, and I've heard people like talk nonstop. We had been looking at it for a couple of years. They're expensive though. They're no joke, like price wise. But she found it on sale, and so like I mean, it's changed my life for grilling because I mean, talk about and I like to grill a lot in the outdoors. Like I have this cool like when we bought this house, I had a plumber that I knew run a gas line outside so I could have a natural gas grill just so I would never have to buy propane. I love grilling out. I wouldn't say I'm a grills mafia or an expert griller, but I like to grill. Blackstone though, like I mean, imagine going from like regular grilling to like being able to cook pancakes in the morning and then cooking bacon on the actual griddle without having to worry about it, falling through the slots on your tinfoil, thing to cause a grease fire on your Weber or whatever. Like it's the best to do. I've done steaks on it. I mentioned pancakes, bacon, stir fry, vegetables, pizzas. I mean, it does everything. Amazing. The only thing you have to know is that like, it takes a lot of effort to clean up, a hell of a lot more than your normal grill does, but it's all worth it. So that's cool. It's cool. I'm glad I'm hearing it from an expert like you that you love it. So
yeah, the Blackstone is elite. I did a ton of the cooking I've done in my life, like professionally, is between flat top and saute. So just like you said, being able to do everything all on one station. And like I've done propane grills and charcoal grills where like, oh, I want to cook up some zucchini with my burger, and then you got to put the foil down, or you got to wrap it in a foil bomb and all that. And now it's just throw it all on. I can do everything all at once. I can cook 5 different meals. Blackstone's elite. We should get some paid advertising for Blackstone.
I know. It is worth every penny of the amount of money it costs just in that. But yeah, so quick question, last question before we ask, before I talk about your podcast and all the great things that you're doing. I mentioned the podcast, one of my favorite sauces to dip chicken in, to do that, like, everyone knows Frank's Red Hot and blue cheese, but one of my favorites is this Polynesian sauce from Aldi that I like to do. It's like a sweet, like my big thing is now is sweet heat. Like I love anything that has sweet heat. I'm talking like Dave's Chicken, like, all those places that have like, Nashville sort of like fried, hot and sweet. I don't know what, like wings. I like the sweet Thai chili sauce. Like that's just my go-to. What is one of your favorite sauces to put on? You mentioned ribs, either on ribs, on chicken wings, anything like that you like to add on it because it just for whatever reason your flavor you like.
I do have a Thai sweet chili sauce that I also got from Aldi that I'm a big fan of. But you know this about me now. I'm in Rochester now, but I'm a Buffalo boy, and for me, Frank's is very easily the top answer. But Chevettas, man.
Oh yeah, Chevettas. Yep.
The Chevettas, you can put that on everything. Tenderize, marinate, slap it right on the grill while you're using it, send up huge flames.
Oh yeah.
Chevettas is elite. More free advertising here. But yeah, for the most part, I keep it pretty simple. I like doing like a Frank's and blue cheese mixed up. I actually, if I make wings at home, this might sound crazy to some people, but I skip the whole dipping in blue cheese process. I get the blue cheese right in the bowl. I put the Frank's in with it. And I toss it all up as one thing, and no dipping,
nice.
just eating.
Just eating.
Legendary stuff here.
I like that. Jeremiah's does a similar thing, except they do it with, I think it's called Nolan's Blues, but I think there's a little bit of like honey in it or something like that. but it's all blue cheese already big. It's great that you don't have to dip it. You just literally just scrape it right off the bottom of the dish. This has been a lot of fun, man. I love talking to you. I know it's been a few weeks and some schedule changes to finally have you on and talk about this. It's been a year or two since I finally talked to you on this podcast. I know we've talked a time or two on yours. So this has been a fun, man. Thank you so much for coming on. Tell everyone where they can find the Wandering Buffalo, where they can find you on Twitter, the Wandering Buffalo on Twitter, anything on social media or anything else.
Yeah, man. First of all, always a blast. My favorite person to talk to about Bills in the game. So thank you for having me on your show. As far as our podcast goes, you can find it pretty much everywhere. YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I think Twitch is out there, TikTok, Twitter. Just search for the Wandering Buffalo podcast. We're out there. Me personally, at JGods22. You can find me on social medias. You got better results if you go right through the podcast page. But also check out the website, wanderingbuff.com. We've really tried to recommit to the website this year. We got me writing some articles. Producer Jake is writing some articles. A couple of my buddies started writing for the site as well. So we have a bunch more articles coming out. We got merch out there. We got the whole nine. Check out the website.
I remember when you first were creating the website, you're like, hey, how does this look? And I was like, this is, I like it a lot. It was simple, but it almost reminded me a little bit of The Athletic before The Athletic got all commercialized and, the New York Times bought it. But it was just a very simple, this is nice. I can find everything I need to. It's well put together. It's not hey, where do I find the podcast or anything like that? It's a well set up process. You and Jake do a great job. I know if you guys aren't following the Wandering Buff on Twitter or Instagram or whatever, but you and Jake do a great job of posting clips of your podcast. So you can get a 1 or 30-second clip, a 1 minute clip of your thoughts on something. So you guys do a great job of that. I try to follow up, man. I try to follow you guys and do what you guys are doing, but you're one of the best at it. So cool. Thank you so much for coming on, man. Love talking to you too. You're easily one of the first people I think of when I want to talk about Bills with my other friends. And honestly, don't tell them this, they're probably not watching, but I could probably sub in 1 or 2 of them for you too, and wouldn't skip a beat.
It's gonna be the episode they listen to.
Finally, hey, Nate was talking to someone else. What the hell? Let's skip to the end to find out if he talks any shit about us. But I got to read this one thing from AJ Tharp at the end. We were talking about Stefon Diggs. AJ says pigeons fly upside down over Stefon Diggs because even they know there's nothing worth shitting on. So that's a good one. AJ always comes in hot. Appreciate all you guys for watching, streaming. We had almost 5,000 views with this, with Justin being on here. And we got to get you on, Justin. I know you're part of the Buffalo fan base also. So if you're listening to this podcast on the Buffalo fan base network, you can find Justin and Jake's work there. I mean, you guys are posting, just as much as we are. A lot of the streams don't post audio. We're looking to change that for the network, but you guys are always religious about that. I know you do video on Spotify too, right? So you can follow YouTube everywhere. So definitely, man, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Appreciate you. This won't be the last time. I'm sure we'll have you in before the training camp, before the season starts and talk more Bills, man. But thank you.
Of course. Thanks as always for having me. We'll be talking soon.
Thank you for listening to the Circling the Wagons podcast. Download and subscribe to us in your favorite podcast service. Email us at ctwpod@gmail.com. That's Charlie Tango Whiskey Pod @gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at CTWPod. And most importantly, go Bills!
Nobody circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills.
Nobody circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills, Nate.
Well, listen, the whole show is called